Good morning, everyone. This is Ohio Dan. I wanted to go ahead and do another video that should be a fairly quick production, although it seems like I ramble on quite a bit, so maybe or maybe not. But I wanted to discuss something that has been touched upon to some extent by others in the MGTOW community. But I basically wanted to give my own perspective on what I would call dark side of the red pill. And by the dark side of the red pill, I'm basically referring to the negative consequences that go along with being your own man in a society where that is basically frowned upon. And moreover, I want to discuss how, even though the idea of going your own way, or the idea of just saying, hey, I don't want to be a part of the traditional system because the traditional system doesn't benefit you as a man. Ultimately, no matter what you do, you're not really rewarded for anything as a guy. You can spend your whole life building a family, acquiring wealth, and a woman can just, if you're married or if you have kids, she can just use those kids against you or take half of your stuff in a divorce. Um, Over half of all marriages end in a divorce, and the system as it is just greatly benefits women at the expense of men. When there are these long-term relationships, when men and women do get married, it's at the detriment of men. And even men who work hard and do all the supposed right things, they're told that they're bad at the end of the day, by not satisfying a woman's insatiable desire to acquire stuff, or have you, for example, work more to make more money, but then say on the other hand that you're not home enough. It doesn't matter what you do as a man, it's basically never good enough to satisfy women in society. And I've discussed this before, but ultimately this all makes it to where there's no real incentive for you as a man to continue to put yourself in this situation and work for nothing basically and become a slave to the system. Or whether I use language like that and say that men are slaves, at the very least you're not respected for what you do as a man, but you're still expected to do all the things that men are expected to do. So just a quick review on the red pill. The red pill in itself takes different forms. It's not always, or not every incarnation is about um, the realization of how men have it in society. There are other red pills. Vincent One MGTOW did a video that says there are many red pills, and I think that's correct. The one that we talk about um, within the manosphere is the realization of how men are treated and what's expected of them, and how essentially we're given nothing in return. So the red pill is basically as itself, not pertaining specifically to um, the manosphere or to men in general, but the red pill in itself, just as a definition, basically involves discovering the truth as an individual in a complicated world. The truth of various things. You can realize different things about our political system. You can come to understand just various things about life as an individual, and how basically what you're taught as a younger person often turns out not to be true, or at least sometimes turns out not to be true in practice. And taking the red pill is basically comprehending new facts, new sets of truth through experience, rather than based on what people tell you is true, that may or not have actual, representation in reality. It may not actually be present in reality. Um, the most important red pill, or perhaps the most important red pill, it's definitely arguable, for men, is everything that I've mentioned, that you are still expected to take responsibility for everyone and play the same provider and protector role that men have always been expected to play, and take on new contemporary responsibilities, doing half the housework, doing your own cooking, doing your own cleaning and laundry and all that. But there's no respect or compensation given in return for doing any of this. And essentially, shame and social expectations are the prevailing forces that keep most men in line, that keep most men what we would call blue pill. Um, and it's effective to a large extent. There are men, more and more men, who are looking at this and saying, I don't want to be part of this system anymore, and I really don't care what you as a whole society, or women collectively say about it. I'm just going to, actually worry about my own health and making good decisions and actually caring about my own interest. But, ultimately there are a lot of men who haven't reached that point and may never reach that point. But as a man, the red pill, of course, that we talk about in our society is realizing these things, that you are still expected to man up, but there's nobody else doing anything for you. It's just you basically stepping up and making sure that society doesn't collapse. And that's the next point, is that, the MGTOW movement and anything that suggests men walking away from traditional responsibilities, walking away from a system that also, like I say, includes other responsibilities that men really never had, that women took care of, raising kids or cooking, taking care of the home. Now men are basically expected to do those things as well, or at least a large portion of those things. When men look at this and say, you know what, I'm walking away from these responsibilities, I'm trying to take care of other people, particularly women, that aren't accountable for anything that they do, so why should I play along with this? This kind of approach, if enough men make these kinds of realizations, this kind of approach is fatal to the current society. The current structure that we have isn't sustainable in the long run. All the debt that we have, all the SJW movements, creating victim groups, none of this can continue indefinitely without the structure being taken down. And I'm sure that, I'll make some more videos, particularly on this, that have more of a political bent in the future. But, suffice it to say that the current structure as it is unsustainable in the long run. But the goal from, just about everybody, including traditionalists and people on the left, the goal is basically to continue to use the structure as it is for as long as you can, so that they can continue to benefit. And when it all comes crashing down, hopefully you're somewhere else, or, a lot of people are in denial that it will come crashing down. But, when you have a system that revolves around treating men, who are the backbone of society, poorly, when you essentially neglect your backbone, it's only a matter of time before the health, the vitality within that society gives out. And there are other political issues in this as well. We can see this with, basically the creation of an Islamic State, or the initial elements of an Islamic State being created within Europe. We can see what the SJWs are doing in Canada, and we can see what, the illegal immigrants are doing, from Mexico, are doing in the United States. And I don't think that the situation is quite as bad in the United States, but, there is just an effort to continue the current system for those who have political power, and for those such as traditionalists, who will continue to delude themselves and believe that ultimately it makes sense somehow to get married. It makes sense somehow to man up and expect other men to just take their place and continue to do for a society that doesn't give a shit about them. So there are so many people on, both sides of the aisle who have an incentive, or at least believe that they have a strong incentive in seeing the current system perpetuate itself for as long as possible. I shouldn't say perpetuate itself, because eventually it will collapse. It can't be a perpetual thing. But the idea is, you have so many different elements: traditionalists, feminists, people in political power, people who are illegally coming to the United States, or who, do want to spread Islam throughout Europe. You have various different groups, whether it be these so-called victim groups, or, like I say, just people in political power that want to see the current system just basically continue, just like a parasite wants to continue to see the host body live for as long as possible. But the actual health of the host body is not really important. It's as long as it continues to survive for a certain period of time. So the dark side of the red pill that I'm mentioning here is the resistance that you'll receive when you choose to go your own way. Most people don't want you disrupting their lives, and the political and social systems and the people in power in those systems will want to silence you if you have a voice, and if you voice red pill issues. This would include really any red pill issue that has political or social ramifications. But again, in particular, I'm talking about men who realize that their situation, that their overall environment is not conducive to just doing things for women until you break down. It's not conducive to having families and just living any kind of traditional or even a more so-called progressive lifestyle. No matter what you do within the system, you just get screwed over as a man. And if you realize this and you voice these viewpoints, most people are not going to appreciate it, and the system will definitely not appreciate it, because anybody with a stake in continuing the current trend of things wants this trend to continue as long as possible, even if in the long run it's extremely toxic and basically suicidal for our society to continue down this path. This path of social and political irresponsibility. Regardless of that, most people have some stake in seeing things continue the way they are. So by you need to be aware, if you are red pill, or if you are, if you consider yourself part of the MGTOW movement or philosophy or whatever you want to call it, you need to be aware that if you apply red pill principles, even if it's just to your own life, or in your own life for the most part, even if you're not really going out there and trying to, evangelize and get other men to see how the situation for them is really unfavorable within the current system, you'll eventually make enemies anyway, even if you're basically just minding your own business, because these entities within the system have an incentive in continuing the status quo. And you know the reason why certain irrational interpretations of the world exist around us in the first place, the reason why they persist even if they don't represent actual reality, is because they hold some sort of other value. And in this case, the value is, without men playing their role as essentially the backbone of society, society won't will be destroyed within a matter of weeks. I mean, without men doing what they do, things cannot continue. And so, there are other red pills that involve political things, like, kind of the, and these are all worth, being a separate video topic, a separate topic of discussion. But, if you take, for example, cultural Marxism and taking the red pill on that, the people in power don't want you to realize that they're creating victim groups so that the government can grow by favoring these certain victim groups. That's a totally different red pill, I think. But, ultimately, when you realize, oh, okay, the government has an incentive to allow illegal immigrants to come into the country because those illegal immigrants need welfare, and the government provides that welfare. So these people will vote for big government that controls, the economy of the country. When you realize these kinds of things about the environment around you, nobody wants to hear it. There are people who will listen, but you have to realize that nobody, for the most part, wants to hear it because the creation of victim groups in this example holds value for the people in political power. It holds value as well for the people who want to take advantage of our social systems, of whether it's welfare or, being given free education or whatever the case may be. That's why someone like Bernie Sanders is popular, is because you have more and more people who want to be considered victims so that they can be given free stuff, essentially. And maybe that's not the only reason for voting for Bernie Sanders, and I understand that. But that is primarily what his motivation is. That's primarily what the motivation of the people who support him is that they want free stuff, big government gives them free stuff, and they benefit while the overall system, you know, takes a hit, while the overall system no longer has um, a long-term healthy forecast because nothing's being done to fix the actual problems within society. And you see this with our national debt, which in itself could be probably considered a red pill because so many people just don't really care or see being trillions in dollars in debt as an issue. And that's sad. But, people benefit from, that not really being covered or talked about as very likely one of the potential reasons why our society will eventually collapse with all the debt and all of the taking advantage of the systems that are in place. So there's a reason why these kind of blue pill interpretations of our environment continue to exist and continue to dominate. It's because they have value. They just don't have value to you as an individual man. And you, as an individual man who's red pill or going your own way, or however you want to describe it, you don't want to be part of the current system. You have to realize and be prepared for the fact that if you take that action in itself is hostile to the system that's in place. And when I say that, there's a dark side to the red pill, that dark side is you are going to be the enemy in many ways of the system that you see around you. You are going to be silenced if possible. People basically don't want you screwing them up, screwing up their fantasy world, or even with people who have more of an actual understanding of what's going on around us, if they have a stake in it, you are then the bad guy for disrupting everything that they seek to gain from the current system for as long as they can until it implodes. So, the dark side of the red pill is realizing that you will be considered kind of an outcast. You will be considered, um, even if your focus is mainly on yourself, if you don't get married, if you don't man up and take care of other people and do what's supposed to be your part in society, you'll be considered, a bad person basically. In a way, you'll have to join the dark side, because that's what society is going to force you to identify as. And the price basically, or one of the, I guess you could call it a negative thing of going your own way, is a lot of people will just not really want to associate with you anymore. And so it's important to be prepared for that eventuality and to be prepared for the reaction that you'll get from society as a whole for you choosing not to really play into the game anymore and to see things as they are and prioritize truth over their happiness or over their goals to get whatever they want from the current system. So that that's what I wanted to cover here, is that there is a dark side to the red pill. And the dark side is you will be forced sometimes to play the role of the bad guy or the outcast or the person who doesn't want to resolve issues or doesn't seem to want to resolve issues because you insist that your alternative view is the case or is true or is valid. So you know the dark side is going to continue to be there, even though overall going MGTOW is clearly the only, to me, it's the only rational choice for a man. Taking the red pill, seeing how the position that men have in society is really unsustainable and unhealthy. That is really by far the best decision, is to accept it for what it is. But by accepting it, you will, in a sense, become part of the dark side, and you have to be prepared to accept that in this way.